The Kweku and Mami Wata, the water sprit. The sky burned crimson as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the coastal village of Tado. A soft breeze carried the scent of salt and damp earth, mingling with the distant murmur of waves. The villagers worked quietly, their movements quick and tense. They knew the signs. A storm was coming, but not one from the heavens. Kweku, the village's most skilled warrior, stood at the edge of the riverbank. His dark eyes scanned the waters, now eerily still, as if the river itself held its breath. His hand rested on the hilt of his blade, the leather-wrapped grip worn smooth by years of use. Kweku was not one for fear, but tonight an unfamiliar weight pressed against his chest. "They're close," said Ekua, the village's healer, her voice a low whisper. She stood a few steps behind him, her arms wrapped around a bundle of dried herbs. Her eyes, sharp and knowing, flickered with worry. "The elders said the invaders are ruthless. Entire villages burned to the ground. They'll come for us next." Kweku's jaw tightened. "Not while I stand." "Bravery won't be enough, Kweku," Ekua replied. "The spirits of the river, we must seek their favor. Offer a prayer, an offering, anything." Kweku shook his head. "The spirits have long abandoned us. We're on our own now." But even as he spoke, a strange unease crept into his thoughts. The river, usually alive with the croak of frogs and the rustle of reeds, was silent. It felt watchful. Suddenly, a distant cry shattered the stillness. It echoed through the trees, sharp and full of terror. Kweku spun, his blade gleaming in the fading light. "Stay here," he commanded, already moving toward the sound. Ekua hesitated, then nodded, clutching her herbs tighter. "Be careful." Kweku darted into the dense underbrush, his footsteps silent as a predator's. The cries grew louder, more desperate, until he broke into a clearing by the river. What he saw stopped him cold. A figure knelt by the water, shimmering in the twilight. Her skin glistened like scales, and her hair flowed like liquid silver. Her eyes, impossibly bright, locked onto his. "Who are you?" Kweku demanded, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. The figure smiled, her lips curving with an unnatural grace. "I have been waiting for you, warrior." Kweku's grip tightened on his blade, but he did not advance. The woman before him, if she could be called that, radiated an aura that froze him in place. The air around her shimmered as though the world bent to her presence, and the river rippled in unnatural patterns at her feet. "What do you want?" he demanded, his voice low, cautious. The figure rose slowly, her movements fluid and otherworldly. "The question is, warrior, what do you want?" Her voice was like the wind brushing over water, soft, melodic, and full of secrets. Kweku hesitated. He had faced many foes in his life, but none like this. "I want my people to be safe," he said finally, his tone edged with defiance. The woman tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "Safety in a world ruled by war? You ask for the impossible." She stepped closer, and Kweku's heart raced as the air grew colder. "But perhaps I can offer you something greater." "I don't make bargains with spirits," Kweku said sharply. Taking a step back, the woman laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally in the clearing. "Oh, but you've already caught my attention, warrior. Do you think that was by chance?" She gestured to the river, now glowing faintly in the darkness. "The waters have watched you, Kweku of Tado. Your strength, your loyalty, you fight for your people, but you fight alone. Tell me, how long before your blade fails you?" Her words struck a chord of doubt deep within him. His last battle had been close, too close. He clenched his jaw, refusing to show weakness. "What are you offering?" The woman smiled, stepping so close that he could see the faint patterns of scales on her skin. "Power," she whispered. "Power beyond anything you've dreamed. Enough to drive your enemies into the sea, enough to protect the ones you love." Kweku's breath quickened, but he forced himself to remain steady. "And the cost?" Her smile widened, revealing sharp, pearlescent teeth. "Everything has a price, warrior, but we'll discuss that if you're willing." The clearing fell silent as her words hung in the air, heavy with temptation and dread. The air between them thickened, carrying a tension that pressed on Kweku's chest like a weight. He could feel the cold radiating from her, sharp as steel against his skin. His instincts screamed at him to leave, to turn his back on this creature and whatever dark bargain she promised, yet his feet remained rooted in place. "I am not a fool," he said finally, his voice steady though his heart thundered in his chest. I know the tricks of spirits. Your gifts always come with chains. The spirit chuckled softly, the sound rippling like waves against the shore. Chains, she mused, stepping closer. Do you not already wear them, warrior? Bound by duty, by blood, by the fear of failure, my chains will not weigh heavier than those you already carry. Her words stung, piercing through his defenses like an arrow. Kweku's grip tightened on his blade as he met her gaze. I fight for my people. I need no spirit's tricks to protect them. And yet, she said, her glowing eyes narrowing, you are here alone, outmatched, and running out of time. How long can you hold back the tide before it drowns you? Her voice softened, almost tender. I offer you power, Kweku of Tado, not for yourself, but for them, to save the ones you love. For a moment, the only sound was the whisper of the river. Kweku's mind raced, torn between his growing unease and the undeniable truth in her words. He had seen the invaders' strength, their merciless advance. Alone, he could not stand against them. If I accept, he said cautiously, what will you take from me? The spirit's smile was slow, deliberate. What I take will not harm you, warrior, but it will bind us, a connection deeper than blood, older than time. Kweku frowned, searching her face for deception, but her expression was unreadable. Finally, he lowered his blade slightly, though his guard remained up. I will hear your terms, spirit, but know this, if you betray me, I will find a way to end you. Her laughter was soft, almost sad. Oh, warrior, she murmured, I would expect nothing less. The spirit's smile faded as she extended a hand, her fingers slender and shimmering as though made of liquid light. The river behind her began to glow brighter, its gentle ripples forming patterns that seemed to shift and dance in the moonlight. Step closer, Kweku, she said, her voice softer now, almost inviting. Let the waters weave their threads around you. They will show you what lies ahead. Kweku's hand hovered near the hilt of his blade, his instincts screaming to run. But the promise of power, the chance to protect his people, kept him rooted in place. Slowly, he took a step forward, then another, until the cold touch of the river's edge seeped through the worn soles of his sandals. As his feet touched the water, a strange sensation coursed through him, not pain, but a deep, vibrating hum that resonated through his bones. The river's glow intensified, and suddenly, the world around him dissolved. He was no longer standing in the clearing, but surrounded by an endless expanse of water and light. What is this? Kweku whispered, his voice trembling despite himself. The spirit appeared beside him, her form both solid and fluid, her silver hair flowing as though caught in a current only she could feel. This is the thread of fate, warrior. Here, the river reveals what is to come. Look, before him the water shifted, forming images as clear as a polished mirror. He saw his village, its huts burning, his people scattering as faceless invaders cut them down. He saw himself, standing in the center of the chaos, his blade raised but powerless against the overwhelming tide of destruction. This is the path you walk now, the spirit said, her voice tinged with sorrow. Alone your strength will falter, your people will fall, unless... The images shifted, showing a different scene. Kweku stood taller, his blade glowing with an ethereal light as he led his people to victory. The invaders fell before him, the river itself rising to sweep them away. Behind him, the villagers cheered, their faces filled with hope. Unless I accept your bargain, Kweku finished, his voice steady but low. The spirit nodded. The choice is yours, warrior, but choose quickly. The threads of fate do not wait. The vision faded, the swirling water dissolving into ripples that lapped gently at Kweku's feet. The spirit stood before him once more, her piercing gaze unyielding. The weight of the choice bore down on him, heavier than any blade he had ever lifted. Kweku inhaled deeply, his fists clenched at his sides. What happens if I choose wrong? He asked, his voice steady but laced with tension. Her smile returned, enigmatic and cold. There is no wrong choice, only consequences. You are a warrior. Surely you understand that every path demands sacrifice. The river's glow dimmed, and the jungle around them seemed to lean in, as though the land itself waited for his decision. The distant hoot of an owl broke the silence, a small reminder that the world beyond this moment still existed. Show me the terms, Kweku said at last, his words sharp like the edge of his blade. The spirit raised her hands, and the water between them began to rise, taking shape. It twisted and turned, forming letters in a language Kweku did not recognize but instinctively understood. The pact was clear. He would be granted the strength of the river, the power to command its fury. In return, his life would no longer belong solely to him. "What does that mean?" he asked, narrowing his eyes at the final line of the pact. "My life will not belong to me." The spirit stepped closer, her presence both alluring and ominous. "It means you will be tied to the river, to me. Your victories will be ours, and your defeats as well. You will become part of something greater, but you will never be free of it." Kweku's mind raced. The images of his village burning, of his people slaughtered, replayed in his mind. He thought of Ekua, of the children who looked up to him as their protector. Could he bear the weight of their loss if he refused? "Do I have your word," he said slowly, meeting her gaze, "that my people will survive if I accept?" The spirit's expression softened, though her eyes burned with ancient knowledge. "You have my word, warrior. The river does not lie." Kweku extended his hand, his heart pounding as the water around them surged. "Then I accept." The moment Kweku's hand met the spirit's, the air crackled with energy. A surge of cold, relentless as the depths of the ocean, shot through his veins. The river roared to life, rising around them in towering, spiraling columns. The pact was sealed, and there was no turning back. "You have chosen, warrior," the spirit said, her voice echoing as though it came from the river itself. Her form began to shift, her features blurring into water and light. "Now you must wield the power you sought." Kweku stumbled back as the water engulfed him, pulling him beneath the surface. He struggled, his instincts screaming for air, but the river did not drown him. Instead, it wrapped around him, showing him its secrets. Visions filled his mind, ancient battles fought by warriors like him, their weapons guided by the river's fury. He felt the weight of their triumphs and the cost of their choices. When he broke the surface, gasping, he was no longer the same. His blade, once simple steel, now glowed with a faint blue luminescence, the markings of the river etched into its surface. The spirit's voice lingered in his mind. "Your enemies approach. Show them the wrath of the waters." Kweku turned toward the distant sounds of chaos, the cries of his people, the clash of steel. The invaders had arrived. With renewed purpose, he ran toward the village, the ground trembling beneath his feet as if the river itself propelled him forward. The invaders stormed through the village, their torches casting flickering shadows on terrified faces. Kweku appeared at the edge of the square, his presence commanding and otherworldly. The leader of the invaders sneered, "One man dares to challenge us? Foolish." But Kweku raised his blade, and the river answered. A torrent of water surged from the earth, sweeping through the square with the force of a hurricane. The invaders screamed as the currents dragged them under, their torches snuffed out in an instant. Kweku moved like a storm-given form, his blade cutting through those who resisted while the river dealt with the rest. When the battle ended, the village stood silent, save for the whispers of the river retreating back to its banks. Kweku stood amidst the wreckage, his glowing blade still in hand. His people emerged from their hiding places, their faces a mix of awe and fear. Ekua approached him cautiously. "What have you done, Kweku?" she whispered. "What have you become?" Kweku looked at the river, its surface calm once more. He could feel its pull, the connection forged by his choice. "A protector," he said, though his voice carried the weight of uncertainty. "For now." The spirit's voice echoed in his mind one final time. "The river flows, warrior, and so must you." Kweku turned to the horizon. Knowing his journey had only begun, Igir smiled, her lips curving with an unnatural grace. "I have been waiting for you, warrior."